The 1990s was a decade that saw an alien-themed media explosion of sorts. Not that aliens hadn't been a part of the media landscape previously, but from the summer blockbuster to the low-budget indie film to the continuation of popular franchises and one of the most popular TV shows of the decade, aliens were everywhere and had firmly seated themselves in pop culture during the decade of the 90s. Some of the films and TV shows of the era have retained a level of high regard and were instrumental in cementing aliens and alien invasion conspiracy theories in the minds of the general population for years to come. But the two-part TV miniseries for the Tommyknockers is understandably not one of them. Hi there, I'm your host, Mr. Doyle, and this is a great undertaking. If you're interested in Stephen King, extraterrestrials, and TV adaptations so bad you can watch them for free on YouTube and no one has bothered to copyright claim them, please consider dropping a like and subscribing to this channel. In my last video, I discussed Stephen King's 1987 novel, The Tommyknockers, and to my surprise, that video has outperformed every video I have ever released over the course of my 2.5-ish years releasing videos on this channel. Thank you to all of the new subscribers who found the channel thanks to that video, and to all the folks who took the time to comment on that video. I'm not sure why that one, the video about one of King's least popular novels, is doing so well, but how all this algorithm shit works is a mystery to me. So I bought this really cool, well, appropriate alien hat for this video, and this is what I got in the mail. So I left the tags on because I'm returning it after this video, but I'm very disappointed that I didn't get my cool alien hat. Anyway, I just finished watching the 3-hour-long TV adaptation of the Tommyknockers last night, and it took me the entirety of a week to get all the way through it. This thing was a slog, and I just couldn't find the strength to force my way through all 3 hours without frequent, lengthy breaks. The blame for how long it took me to watch the whole thing cannot be solely placed upon the quality of the adaptation necessarily, because I fell asleep 3 nights in a row while trying to finish the last 30 minutes, but that's certainly not a glowing endorsement of its ability to captivate audiences either. By the time the show was reaching its climax, I had admittedly checked out and just wanted it to be over. But having said all that, I think it's safe to say that this is the least fondly remembered, least popular, and most unenjoyable of the numerous Stephen King TV adaptations that saw release in the 90s, or just that saw release ever, and not without reason. So while the adaptation was definitely not among fan favorites, it was released during a time in which if someone was looking for movies and TV shows about aliens, there was a veritable smorgasbord of options to choose from. And so the Tommyknockers was likely not going to be anyone's first, second, third, or even 40th choice. But before we get into the sci-fi alien invasion craze of the 90s, let's discuss the problematic production of the Tommyknockers 2-part TV miniseries for a little while first. The Tommyknockers 2-part TV miniseries. History and background. It's not uncommon for King's screen adaptations to encounter all variety of issues, mishaps, blunders, and outright disasters during production, and not only is the Tommyknockers no exception, It may very well have been plagued by and inundated with more troubles than any King production I've researched to date, and that at least helps to explain some of the shortcomings of this miniseries. First and foremost, the story was, of course, set in the small Maine town of Haven during the summer. The filming schedule, however, had to start in October of 1992 and conclude in May of 1993, which, in the northern United States, is not when summer happens. But for whatever reason, ABC, the distributor of the miniseries, insisted that this was the window in which filming had to take place. So, rather than film in the US during the summer, the production had to be moved to New Zealand, which led to a snowball effect of problems for the production team. From 200 inexperienced Kiwi crew members, the budget-annihilating costs and nightmare process of shipping vital filmmaking equipment, transporting support staff from the United States to New Zealand and from New Zealand back to the United States, customs concerns about large quantities of flammable chemicals, and all manner of unpredictable mishaps. The production was riddled with problems before the cameras even started to roll. Additionally, director Louis Teague was fired on the second day of filming, supposedly because he wasn't working fast enough. I mean, it was his second day, but okay. And also because, according to executive producer Frank Koenigsberg, Teague's vision was, quote, not going to work within the parameters of the miniseries, unquote, which is just the vaguest non-explanation I've ever heard. Prior to not directing Tommyknockers, Teague had directed two King screen adaptations, both Cujo in 1983 and Cat's Eye in 1985. Director John Power would replace Teague, and Power's filmography is made up exclusively of a bunch of made-for-TV movies and TV miniseries, none of which I have ever seen or heard of before. The screenplay was written by a regular on this channel, Mr. Lawrence D. Cohen, who also wrote the screenplay for the OG 1976 Carrie film, as well as the 1990 It TV miniseries. Apparently, on top of all the other problems the Tommyknockers production encountered, there were additional delays due to the fact that there were a number of ongoing rewrites during filming, and while the first half was being filmed, the second half still hadn't been written. While we're on the topic of Lawrence Cohen, I want to take a moment to address something I got wrong in a previous video, or rather a few previous videos. So there is Lawrence Cohen, and there is another guy named Larry Cohen, both of which have worked on a number of King-related adaptations, but I had mistakenly believed that this was the same dude and that he went by both Lawrence and Larry, Larry being a hypocorism or abbreviation of Lawrence. But no, Larry and Lawrence are not in fact the same person. So while Lawrence is in part responsible for this awful Tommyknockers adaptation, he is also responsible for something far more egregious, the horrendously obnoxious canker sore of a stage production, Carrie the Frickin' Musical. Larry Cohen, however, is responsible for the raging turd fire of a movie, A Return to Salem's Lot, which is easily among the top 3 worst movies I've ever seen. So at this point, I'm going to continue to conflate Lawrence and Larry and pretend that they are in fact the same person and admonish them both simultaneously for their crimes against Stephen King's intellectual property in equal measure. Curse you, Lawrence! Larry Cohen, you chode-nibbling swill guzzlers! Yeah. But I digress. Is the Tommyknockers 2-part TV miniseries any good? No. No, it's not. The acting, special effects, score, and pretty much everything about this TV miniseries is Unremarkable at best and laughably bad at worst. Jimmy Smits stands out among a number of inept and unimpressive performances, but even Smits isn't all that convincing, and it doesn't take much to stand out in this particular crowd. When it comes to the special effects, there are some fun contraptions and inventive moments, but in regards to the CGI and the creature effects specifically, they're terribly dated. But you can tell they did the best they could considering the issues the production dealt with and the resulting time constraints and budget restrictions. They made a valiant effort, but I'm afraid it still fell well short of special when it comes to the effects. As for the soundtrack and score, my god, is it so boring. Long, extended notes of seemingly endless, stereotypical, sci-fi sounding synths that just drone on and never go anywhere or even bother to make an attempt at a melody. I get that it's a vibe and everything, but I feel I could have made a more interesting score in a couple hours using nothing but a rubber band, a coconut, and a live salmon. So yeah, I didn't care for this adaptation at all. And aside from all the aforementioned shortcomings, a great deal of what made the novel so enjoyable for me didn't make it into the miniseries. I try to be charitable when it comes to condensing a lengthy novel down to a 3-hour screenplay. Obviously, you can't include everything from the book. But in this instance, what was missing was the heart of the story. Guard's struggle with alcoholism and how his desire to save his friend, to save the person he loved more than anyone else in the world, it was enough to bring him back from rock bottom. And while Guard's drinking problem does come into play, the emphasis just isn't there the way it is in King's book. Alright, the Tommyknockers maybe didn't have the cultural impact that a lot of King novels and films did, but as I mentioned earlier, the Tommyknockers miniseries was just one of hundreds, if not thousands, of alien-related movies and shows that exploded onto the scene in the decade of the 90s. The 90s alien invasion. Aliens were everywhere in the 90s. Not that aliens and alien-themed films and TV shows hadn't been a part of pop culture prior to the 90s, but an insane amount of media, and some of the most popular, successful media of the decade, was all about aliens, outer space, and extraterrestrials. Independence Day, Fire in the Sky, Starship Troopers, Mars Attacks, Men in Black, Galaxy Quest, Alien 3, Predator 2, The Faculty, Stargate, The X-Files, Third Rock from the Sun, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Space Jam, and of course the Tommyknockers to a much lesser extent, but regardless, the list goes on and on. Daniel Galata, a PhD candidate at Stanford University specializing in American religious history, published an article on thebulwark.com in June of 2021 regarding the dominance of alien-themed media in the 90s, which reads as follows. Quote, "The 90s saw a huge wave of pop culture interest in UFOs and visits from extraterrestrials. One of the leading factors in this alien craze, both a symptom and a cause, was The X-Files, a TV sensation unlike anything before it. At its peak, the show had 20 million viewers tuning in each week to see FBI Special Agents Fox Mulder and Dana Scully deal with unexplained phenomena, possible alien abductions, and shadowy government conspiracies. Meanwhile, Aliens Come to Earth movies were a major draw, featuring such titles as Species, Independence Day, Contact, Men in Black, and The Faculty." Unquote. Galata goes on to describe the effect that this wave of interstellar entertainment had on the general population of the US, saying, quote, "Belief in alien involvement in human affairs reached strange new heights. Although one of the most infamous statistics of that era, the widely discussed claim extrapolated from a 1991 Roper survey, that as many as 3.7 million Americans might have been abducted by aliens, tells us less about what the public actually believed than about the strangeness of that intellectual and journalistic moment, unquote. If nothing else, this statistic shows us how influential popular media can be on huge swaths of the population, even when said media is explicitly fictional. That's concerning, but not at all surprising. Anyway, alien conspiracies thrived, as did distrust in government institutions, thanks to shows like The X-Files. The government trying to hide the truth about extraterrestrials seemed entirely reasonable and realistic, particularly to those who had been consuming all of this Martian media. Then, according to the article's author, Galata, in the early 2000s, something happened, or perhaps a couple of somethings happened, that made this conspiratorial way of thinking and distrust in the government suddenly seem improper and irrational. To quote further from the Bulwark article, quote, "The intense popular interest in aliens and UFOs during the 1990s dissipated around the turn of the century. By 2001, the weekly audience for The X-Files was half what it had been at the show's peak. Then came the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001, which not only focused the nation's attention on matters of national security and war, but also resulted in a rapid rise in Americans' trust in their government. In that new atmosphere, the kinds of stories told on The X-Files, tales of government conspiracies and cover-ups about aliens, came, at least for a while, to seem frivolous. Meanwhile, advances in consumer technology chipped away at the public belief in UFOs. As ever more people had phones with cameras on them at all times, blurry photos and amateur videos, once a staple in UFO sightings, seemed to disappear. The burgeoning market for drones meant there was suddenly a plausible explanation always at hand for many strange sights in the sky. Over the 2000s, numerous alien interest groups were disbanded, and the frequency of UFO sightings was in free fall. And instead of movies about extraterrestrial encounters, audiences were being offered a different genre of blockbuster: superheroes, unquote. So, according to Galata, it was 9/11 and the advent of smartphones and internet technology that seemingly killed the alien craze of the 90s in rapid-fire fashion. It makes sense that due to the attack on the World Trade Center, the unknown was suddenly a far more threatening prospect, and there was a desire to show patriotism by way of trusting in the government. It was comforting suddenly to believe that the powers that be were going to protect the populace. Americans wanted to trust the government. Hell, George W. Bush's approval rating was at a record high following the attack at 85%, which is among the highest of any president ever. Folks didn't want to believe anymore, at least not in the shadowy forces of secretive government branches hiding the truth. But to say these outlandish tales of abductions and invasions lost their allure due to the internet and smartphones, well, I find that hard to believe. I mean, I think we can all agree that the likelihood of the internet and smartphones leading to a decrease in the spread of and susceptibility to far-out conspiracy theories is contrary to what we've seen in the years that followed, whether about aliens or otherwise. If there's one thing we know for sure about the internet, smartphones, and social media, it's that they're capable of spreading unfounded, wildly inaccurate misinformation in ways we never could have imagined back in the late 90s and early 2000s. But at the time, it certainly wasn't the breeding ground for these sorts of rumors and obscure authoritative suppositions that it is now. That's not to say that UFOs and alien abduction are definitely not a real thing. Like so many of life's mysteries, when it comes to the unfathomable, unknowable contents of the great beyond and its potential inhabitants, I subscribe to the anything's possible, what the fuck do I know mindset. And I feel like anyone who claims to know for sure is either unjustly arrogant or even more likely full of shit. I've linked the article from the Bulwark in the description below for anyone interested in reading further about the alien invasion of the 1990s. The article goes into a great deal more than just mass media and its effects on the population, but since that's all this segment is supposed to be about, and this video is long enough already, I'm going to stop right here. Final thoughts. Was the Tommyknockers a success? No, definitely not. Was it a standout among its multitude of peers and competitors? Again, no. But it was in good company and contributed at least a little bit to the extraterrestrial excitement of the era that was undeniably influential and transformative. I can't in good conscience recommend anyone watch it, but just in case you want to check it out for yourself because you've learned nothing from this video, I've left a link below. You really shouldn't watch it, but hey, you do you. Just do yourself a favor and read the book too. Alright, that's it for the Tommyknockers series. In my next video, I will be discussing, well, I'm not sure yet, but it'll be something Stephen King related. So if you're into that sort of thing, maybe it's maybe the dark half, or it could be the night flyer. I can't remember. Please consider liking this video if you're not subscribed. Please click the subscriber bell to get notifications. Thank you to all my subs and the constant commenters for watching and leaving me your comments in the section of comments and thoughts and comments thoughts. This is supposed to be scripted, but I have had a very hard time making words with my cake hole this evening. Anyway, I'll see you next time, whenever that might be. Okay, goodbye. Be sure to click like and subscribe to the channel for my continued analysis of all things Stephen King, pretty pleased with blood and guts on top. My name is Mr. Doyle, and this has been a great undertaking.